Nate, if you don't want to be recorded, you should turn your camera off, but you're more than welcome to leave it on. All right. Today I'm going to be talking about R and Singularity. So I'm going to share my screen and show a few things. I've published a little example. It's kind of goofy because this is a lot of work to just run a single R script, but I want to show how to make a repeatable image file that you can run an R script on our brain imaging servers. You can run it, another person can run it, someone can run it 5 years from now, and it will be the same. The reason it might not be if you just use the base version of R, that base version of R might get upgraded. If you install libraries, those go into like your home directory or somewhere in study, and it's maybe not clear how to get people to use the same set of libraries. With this, everything is in one file and it's very well defined. Let me pull up. I'm going to show what it looks like building. Oh, I just got I've been trying to add on. I'm exploring to see if we can get RStudio embedded in this as well. What it looks like when you build a Singularity file from an image is you tell Singularity, hey, build me an image from this definition, and off it goes, and it's just going to start doing crazy, Linux install stuff. You don't necessarily need to know that much about Linux to use this particular file. I want to just show what it looks like, this definition file that defines to Singularity. Here's what we're putting inside the virtual machine. I might need to make this a little bit bigger. Is that visible?
Yeah.
All right.
Hey, so I got a dumb question, Dan.
Yeah.
So sorry to ask dumb questions so early on, but
Good.
so you're saying we're using Singularity? Are we using Docker or Singularity or both or what?
No, we're using Singularity. Singularity is kind of like Docker, but it doesn't require root permissions, and it runs easier on our server. Basically, we can't get Docker to go on our server currently because of security reasons. But Singularity can import Docker images and run them. And so there's kind of some interop there. Does that answer the question?
It does. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, Singularity is basically another thing like Docker, another thing like Firecracker, all these things that can like spin up VMs in user space and then run them. And if you don't know what that means, if you're not a Linux nerd, the way to think of it is the login server that you log into, like Baldi or Carlo, has a certain set of like kernel and operating software. And inside that, you can make a little VM with Singularity that is itself kind of a virtual, it is a real complete virtual machine that then talks to its parent machine. And then you have complete control over that little VM, that virtual machine. So here we're going to define what we're doing with that virtual machine. There's some stuff that is just required at the top that says we're going to bootstrap from the Docker images and what version of Linux we're going to build from. You don't really need to know anything about that. You can set some metadata about what apps you expect to run. Here, since we're doing R, we're going to allow running R, RScript, and eventually RStudio. I don't have that working yet. And then the main chunk of this definition file is this post definition, which is a bunch of script, just bash script, that runs after the Docker images are all downloaded and initialized. So the virtual machine starts up from kind of like a blank slate of Ubuntu at a certain version. And then we're going to do some stuff. And this is the thing that I've configured so that R will compile easily and tidyverse will compile easily and all that stuff. You don't necessarily need to understand all this. You could easily use this definition file. And all you would have to do is scroll down to the bottom and you will see these little install lines. There's probably a better way to write this. I'll improve it as we go. But each one is installing some R package. So here we're installing tidyverse. We're just saying, hey, R, run in slave mode and execute this R script to run the install packages, which will then call out to GCC and do all kinds of mumbo jumbo. the point of all this is that we make this very simple def file, this definition file, which is very small, easy to modify, easy to add packages to. And then you can take this file and build a virtual machine image from it. And so that's what's going on in this window. It's going off and it's already gotten to the point where it's installing R packages. It's compiling stuff and away it goes. When you're done, I'll show what it looks like. Let's just, yeah, okay. When you run Singularity on an image, you built this Singularity image file, and there's a complexity there that we're going to come back to, but I'm going to ignore it for now. You tell Singularity, I want to build an image file from this definition file. And now once you've got an image file, you just say, hey, Singularity, oh, my Zoom thing is getting in the way. Run, this is the thing that you defined, the app R script is basically an alias into a thing that's inside the virtual machine. So we're running R script inside the VM, inside this r.sif image file. And we're just telling it, we're passing it minus version. And all that happens is Singularity says, info, I'm converting that SIF file to a sandbox. That's for reasons on the BI servers, you don't have permission to just run the image without unpacking it. You don't need to worry about that. That all happens off in a temporary location. And then the VM starts up and it runs minus version, and you get to see, oh, that's R scripting front end, blah, 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 blah. Now, as long as I put this image file somewhere on my study drive and I don't change it, that VM is always going to run that version of R and that set of packages I installed for all time. And it will be compatible-ish with versions of Linux going forward. Like not until the heat death of the universe probably, but it'll last a good long while. We then just see cleaning up images, and that's it. That's all that happens when I do Singularity run minus version. But I can also run interactive things by saying run app R and just give it no parameters. You might be familiar with the command line version of R, where it just drops you into the REPL. And now I'm off and going, and I can type commands in here, and that's all happening inside my virtual machine. Now, it's a little bit funky because the virtual machine does not have access to all the files on the study drive, all the files on the network for security reasons. You don't want your virtual machine to have access to everything. So if you want to give access, there is an example script in the Git repo that explains how you might do that. So this is an example of how you might actually run an R script on like in a cron job or something. You would say Singularity run, and then you say bind, and you say a source directory to a destination path. The reason this looks a little bit weird, I have two lines that bind something to the same thing, where I say var www root to the same exact path. What that means is inside the virtual machine, when I go to this second thing, it's going to go to outside the virtual machine to get this first thing. So it's a tunnel basically, and we're just calling it the same thing because why not? It's just easier to call the tunnel. We could call it something else over here. We could call it /tunnel, and then we could write scripts that look in /tunnel. But for me, it's just clearer if we use the same paths. So here we're passing through to locations, and then we're telling Singularity run our script with that image file that we have and pass it this R file. And then we can pass parameters to that script just like we would if we were running a normal R script. And so here we're passing in a path to a SQLite file and then a path to an output CSV. And so,
Hey, Dan?
Yeah.
So does it create the local study drive within the virtual machine, or do you need to do that as a separate step or something? Or the study folder to bind that thing into?
When you do this bind line, and I could show an example of this, you basically just tell Singularity when the virtual machine starts up, it will automatically sort of mount that location to that location. So it mounts slash study whatever. So if I set study equal to, say, Chad,
Sure.
I would then be able to go to slash study slash Chad, and I would see all the files that are actually on the network in study slash Chad, because
Yeah.
there would be that pass through. Singularity would be creating a binding between those locations.
So you never actually need to separately do like a make dir / study for that thing to mount
Nope.
into.
Nope, you don't
Okay.
need to prep anything. It will prep it for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, question then: how big is the Singularity image?
Good question. Currently, the one that, let's not save workspace image. Let's look. The one that doesn't have RStudio but does have tidyverse. Tidyverse is actually surprisingly large. Is about 360 megs. So not that big. I mean, it's well under a gig. I have a feeling once RStudio and all the stuff required for that is on, it'll be closer to a gig, like 2/3 of a gig or so. But that's still not that big. I think.
So would you put this on also on a GitHub or some repository? How does that work?
I wouldn't put the image file on GitHub. I would put, or in a Git repository, I would put the definition file in your Git repository. So your Git
so you can build it. Okay, got it.
Yeah, so you can version, like, here's the versions of packages I was installing, and I tweaked the image a bit to add this package. You still have that information, but it doesn't take up that much space. There is a little caveat here. I elided a tricky fact. If you're doing this on your own machine with Singularity, you'll have root access and you will be able to build images from a definition file, just like I showed you. However, if you're doing this on the brain imaging servers, you don't have root access, it won't work. But I've documented in the README file this handy little feature that they have added to Singularity, where if you don't have root access, you can log into this cloud.scilabs.io, and you'll get a token, and then you run a little command to link up your account, basically. And then when you do Singularity build, you can add the -- remote parameter, and it will actually send your definition file over to some AWS server off in the cloud that Scilabs is running. It will build for you, and then it will return the image to your local machine transparently, just like you had built it yourself locally. I've talked to David and Nate. Nobody is too concerned about the security implications of this.
Wouldn't that be a huge download then?
It's actually not that big. I mean, again, it's like 360 megs or whatever.
No, but if you have your full thing set up, I mean, including RStudio and whatever environment you want to build, if you build the whole thing, wouldn't it be rather large?
Right, but it's still not going to be larger than like a gigabyte or so, I think.
Okay, got it.
Because you're not embedding any data files or anything. It's just all executables. And I'm not actually sure how big the RStudio thing will be. I'm still working on that side of things. But not that big. I wouldn't worry about it. And once you've got your image working, you're probably not going to be rebuilding it that often. Once you're in your analysis and you've picked your packages and you know what parts of Tidyverse you're using and whatever add-ons you have, then you're pretty much set. I hope that isn't too bad. I would imagine that what this is mostly going to be used for, and I can definitely help set it up for any projects that need it, is when you're trying to do something in R that you're running once in a while over time. For an example, Midas has something called Brain Age that uses R and MATLAB and some other stuff, and it's kind of terrifying because it doesn't run the same for every user. Things like that, where you want to be able to have new people come on and run this script years later and have it work exactly the same. I think that's the big win here. If you're just doing exploratory work in R, I wouldn't bother. When you're ready to package it up and say, I'd like to make a little definition file so anybody who's reading my paper and links to my source code that I've published wants to make a little image, you can include the definition file with your source code. And then they could build the same image as you and have the same exact versions of the software and everything. Any questions about that? So yeah, I encourage people to get in touch if you're wanting to do something with R that you want to sort of lock down and create a little magical crystal that does that contains the right versions of software. I'm gonna stop sharing if I can figure out how this time. Yes. Any questions, anybody? Otherwise, I'm just gonna stop recording, then we can have a little mini chat.
Is there a way to generate? I mean, I know it's just lines of code in the end where you're saying drive this as slave mode and then this is the package, but like you can do R version and it'll list all the package versions.
Yeah,
Is there something similar that would generate a def file?
it would be pretty easy to make a script to generate a def file. I haven't done that yet, but yeah, then you could just have a list of packages. Yeah, that would be pretty simple. Maybe worth doing, yeah, so that you would only have your packages and you wouldn't even have to look at the mess in the def file. That's a good idea. All right, I'm going to stop recording.